She was not running to save herself. She was running because something smaller than fear was still alive in the dark. At 2:17 in the morning, on a rain-slick service road outside Coos Bay, Oregon, Staff Sergeant Caleb Whitaker saw the shape burst from the tree line like a shadow torn loose by the storm. His pickup's headlights caught her for only a second at first, just a flash of sable fur, wet ribs, amber eyes, and one front paw that touched the asphalt too carefully. Caleb hit the brakes. The tires hissed over the blacktop, the truck shuddered, and the German Shepherd stopped less than 10 feet from his bumper. She did not bark. She did not snarl. She stood in the hard silver rain with her chest heaving, water streaming from her muzzle, and stared through the windshield as if she had been waiting for that exact pair of headlights all night. Caleb sat frozen behind the wheel, one hand still gripping the brake, the other hovering near the door handle. He had seen fear before. He had seen it in the eyes of young Marines trying to joke their way through bad news, in the stillness before a medic spoke, in the silence after a radio went dead. But this was different. This dog was afraid, yes, but not for herself. There was purpose in the way she held the road. A trained stillness. A command without sound. Rain hammered the roof of the truck. Pine branches swayed above the narrow road, their needles shining under the beams like wet wire. Somewhere beyond them, the Pacific wind pushed the smell of salt, mud, diesel, and old timber through the cracked window. Caleb lowered the glass an inch. "Easy, girl," he said, his voice rough from a long shift and too many hours alone. The shepherd's ears lifted at the sound of him. Her body trembled, but she did not step away. Around her neck there was no collar, only a pale ring in the fur where one had been. Mud clung to her legs. A shallow scrape marked her shoulder, washed clean again and again by the rain. She looked like a dog that had crossed half a forest with one thought left inside her. Caleb opened the door slowly. The cold struck him first, sharp and wet. He stepped down into the road, boots splashing in a thin river running along the shoulder. The dog backed up 2 steps, not fleeing, only making room. Then she turned toward the trees and looked back. Caleb knew that look. He had followed it once in Helmand, when a military working dog had stopped dead beside a broken wall and refused to move. Men were alive because someone had listened. He took 1 step forward. The shepherd limped another few yards toward the ditch, then stopped again, checking on him. "You want me to follow?" Caleb asked, though the question felt foolish the moment it left his mouth. The dog answered by lowering her head, taking the cuff of his field jacket gently between her teeth and tugging once. Not hard, not wild, just enough. Caleb felt something close around his ribs. A memory, maybe. A voice from years ago. A hand gripping his sleeve in dust and smoke. "Don't leave me here." He swallowed and reached back into the truck for his flashlight. In the passenger seat lay his old Marine Corps cap, faded at the brim, and beside it a pair of dog tags he no longer wore but never stopped carrying. He left the engine running, hazard lights blinking red into the rain, and followed the shepherd down the embankment. The ground gave beneath his boots. Wet grass slapped his jeans. Water ran cold along his collar. Ahead of him, the dog moved with painful urgency, disappearing and reappearing between the pines like a signal flare dimming in fog. Caleb kept the flashlight low, the beam trembling across roots, stones, and puddles filled with brown leaves. "Slow down," he called softly. "I'm with you." At that she paused, just for one breath. Her amber eyes found his again, and for that breath Caleb saw her clearly. Not a stray, not simply lost. She carried herself like AK-9, like something shaped by discipline, love, and a job she had refused to abandon. Then the wind shifted. The rain thinned for half a second, and from somewhere deep ahead, beneath the groan of trees and the steady tapping of water on rotting wood, Caleb heard it. A sound so small he almost mistook it for the squeak of a branch. A thin cry, then another. Weak, buried, alive. The shepherd froze. Every muscle in her body pointed toward the darkness beyond the trail. Caleb's throat tightened. He turned off the flashlight for a moment and listened with the whole of himself. The cry came again, softer now, almost swallowed by the storm. Puppies. The word did not need to be spoken. The dog took 1 staggering step forward, then another, and Caleb followed faster, his heart beginning to pound not with fear now, but with the terrible knowledge that somewhere in that blackness, time was running out. The cry came again, and Caleb Whitaker felt the years between past and present fold into a single breath. He was no longer only standing in the Oregon rain with a flashlight in his hand. Some part of him was back under a sky the color of dust, listening for a voice beneath broken concrete, promising a young corporal that help was coming while the radio hissed and time slipped away. Caleb had survived that day. The man under the rubble had not. Since then, every small sound in the dark had carried a weight other people could not hear. He had come home with both legs, both hands, and a chest full of ghosts. People in town called him steady, reliable, the kind of man who could fix a fence, change a tire, carry groceries for an old woman without making a show of it. They did not know that most nights he kept his boots beside the bed because sleeping barefoot made him feel unprepared. They did not know that he drove long roads after midnight because silence inside a house could become louder than thunder. The shepherd glanced back at him from between two leaning pines, rain dripping from her ears. Caleb forced his breath to slow. "I hear them," he whispered. "I hear them, girl." She turned and pushed deeper into the timber. The service road disappeared behind them, swallowed by fog and branches. Caleb moved after her, one hand raised to shield his eyes from the rain, the other holding the flashlight low so its beam would not bounce uselessly off the mist. The forest floor sloped downward, soft with needles and soaked leaves. Twice his boots slid. Once he caught himself on a fir trunk and felt cold bark scrape his palm. The dog waited each time, tense and trembling, but patient in the way trained dogs are patient when panic would waste what little strength remains. After another 50 yards, the trees opened into a small clearing he had never seen before, though he had driven this road for months. A sagging timber shed stood at the far end, half hidden under blackberry vines and storm-bent cedar limbs. Its roof had partly caved in. One wall leaned inward. A rusted rain barrel lay on its side near the door, collecting muddy water in its dented curve. The place smelled of wet plywood, old hay, and something sour that made Caleb's jaw tighten. The shepherd stopped at the edge of the clearing. Her body lowered, not from fear of him, from exhaustion. Caleb stepped closer and saw her front paw shake under her weight. She had been holding herself upright by will alone. "You did good," he said softly. "Now let me see." He crouched, reaching out slowly, letting her smell his hand. She did. Her nose was cold against his knuckles. For one brief moment, her eyes softened, and beneath the mud and pain, Caleb saw the animal she must have been before this night. Proud, intelligent, loved by someone once or trained by someone who should have known better than to let her vanish. But the next cry came from the shed, thin as a thread pulled too tight, and the softness disappeared. She lurched forward. Caleb rose and followed. At the doorway, he saw marks in the mud. Paw prints. Many of them. Some large. Some tiny. There were also drag lines where something had been pulled or shifted during the storm. Nothing about the scene felt right, but Caleb kept his mind on the sound. One problem at a time. That was how Marines were taught to survive what could not be understood all at once. The door would not open. It had swollen in the rain and jammed against the warped frame. Caleb set the flashlight between his teeth for a moment, gripped the handle, and pulled. The wood groaned, but held. The shepherd pressed her nose to a gap near the bottom, whining now, the first real sound she had made since blocking his truck. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It carried a mother's pleading. Caleb stepped back, scanned the wall, and found a loose board near the side where the siding had rotted through. He wedged his fingers beneath it and pulled until the nails gave with a tired squeal. The opening was only a foot wide, but the air that slipped out was colder than the rain, stale and damp, carrying another small cry from somewhere below the floor. Caleb aimed the flashlight inside. The beam swept across broken shelves, a torn feed sack, old rope, and a square section of flooring that had collapsed near the back corner. Beneath it, darkness. The shepherd tried to push through the gap. "No," Caleb said, catching her gently around the chest. "Not yet." She struggled once, then stopped, not because she agreed, but because her body could not argue anymore. Caleb pulled off his field jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders as best he could. She shivered beneath it, eyes locked on the hole inside the shed. "I know," he said, his voice almost gone. "I know they are in there." He moved around to the front again, drove his shoulder against the swollen door, and felt it give an inch. Then another. The third push sent it scraping inward with a burst of wet dust and splinters. Caleb stumbled into the shed, sweeping the light over the floor. The cries rose for a moment, then faded, as if the small bodies below had spent all the strength they had saved for being found. He dropped to one knee beside the broken boards. Through the gap, 5 tiny shapes huddled in a shallow drainage pit beneath the floor, their fur dark with rainwater, their bodies pressed together for warmth. One was caught near a bent strip of metal, too weak to pull free. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, not to pray with words. There was no time for words, only a silent plea that moved through him like breath. Then he opened them, set the flashlight down, and began clearing the boards with his bare hands. Caleb worked with the kind of focus that had once carried him through sandstorms, alarms, and nights when every second mattered. He did not think about the cold biting into his fingers or the rainwater dripping from his hair onto the rotting floor. He thought only of the space beneath the boards, the tiny bodies pressed together in the drainage pit, and the one puppy caught near the bent metal strip. The shed creaked around him as wind pushed through the broken roof. Every board he lifted gave off the smell of wet pine and age. Some came away easily, softened by years of weather. Others resisted, their nails clinging to the frame as if the building itself did not want to surrender what had been hidden beneath it. "Hold on," Caleb whispered, though he did not know whether he was speaking to the puppies, to the shepherd wrapped in his jacket outside the doorway, or to the part of himself that had been standing in another place, beside another trapped soul, for far too long. The first puppy was nearest the edge, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its dark muzzle tucked against a sibling's back. Caleb slid one arm down through the opening, careful not to let loose boards drop into the pit. The little one barely moved when his hand touched it. For a terrible instant, Caleb felt the old dread rise in him, cold and familiar. Then the puppy gave a faint squeak, so small it seemed to come from the floor itself. Caleb exhaled through clenched teeth. "There you are," he said. He lifted the puppy into the crook of his arm and placed it inside his jacket near the door, making a shallow nest from the lining. The shepherd dragged herself forward, nose quivering, and pressed her muzzle to the puppy's side. She licked once, gently, then lifted her eyes back to Caleb. "Not enough," they seemed to say. "Not yet." He reached down again. The second and third came together, curled so tightly that he had to separate them with patient fingers. Their fur was soaked through, black and tan made nearly colorless by mud and rain. One opened its mouth as if to cry, but produced only a breath. Caleb tucked them beside the first, then pulled an old canvas tarp from a shelf and folded it over the growing bundle. Outside, thunder rolled low across the coast, not sharp, but deep enough to tremble in the walls. Water began dripping faster through the collapsed roof, tapping around the hole in uneven rhythms. Caleb aimed the flashlight into the pit again. 2 puppies remained. The fourth was against the far side, half submerged in muddy water that had begun to rise through a clogged drain. The fifth, the smallest, was the one caught by the bent strip of metal. It was not a wound Caleb feared now. It was time. Cold did not need drama. Cold did its work quietly. He looked at the gap, then at his own shoulders. Too narrow. He pulled another board free. The floor groaned beneath him. "All right," he said softly. "We do this slow." Behind him, the shepherd struggled to stand. His jacket slipped from her shoulders. She took one step into the shed and faltered. Caleb turned just in time to see her legs shake. "No, girl. Stay." But she did not stay. She lowered herself beside the opening, her nose almost touching the dark, and released a low, broken whine that changed the room. The puppies answered. Not strongly, not all at once, but enough. A thin chorus rose from the pit, fragile and uneven, and Caleb understood then that she was not only asking him to save them. She was calling them back. He lay flat on his stomach, chest pressed into the wet floor, and reached for the fourth puppy. His fingertips brushed fur. The puppy slipped away in the water. Caleb stretched farther, ribs tight against the edge of the boards, boots searching for grip. For 1 second, the flashlight rolled, and the beam swung wildly up the wall, over old feed labels, a rusted hook, and a faded stencil on a wooden crate. Caleb saw 2 words before the light moved on: coal kennels. The name lodged somewhere in his mind, but he pushed it aside. Later. Justice could wait until life was out of the hole. He caught the fourth puppy by the loose skin at the back of its tiny neck, not pulling hard, just guiding it close enough to cradle with his palm. It trembled against him as he lifted it free. 4. The shepherd touched each one with her nose as he placed it with the others, counting in the only way she knew. Then Caleb turned back to the smallest. The last puppy made no sound now. It lay near the metal strip, one paw caught beneath it, its body still except for the faintest rise near the ribs. Caleb reached down, but the angle was wrong. He tried again. The edge of the broken floor pressed into his shoulder. Muddy water touched his wrist. The strip would not move. He glanced around, found a rusted pry bar near a stack of old boards, and pulled it free. The handle was slick, but usable. He lowered it carefully into the pit, working by touch and the weak beam of his flashlight. Easy, he breathed. Easy. The metal gave a fraction of an inch. The puppy did not stir. Caleb heard his own breathing now, loud in the small shed. He heard rain, wood, the shepherd's faint whine, and beneath it all, the echo of a promise he had made years ago and failed to keep. Not this time. He adjusted the pry bar and lifted again. The strip shifted. The tiny paw came free. Caleb dropped the tool, reached down with both hands, and gathered the smallest puppy from the cold water. It was frighteningly light. Too light. He pulled it to his chest and wrapped it in the driest part of his shirt, rubbing gently with 2 fingers, trying to lend warmth without stealing what little strength remained. The shepherd lifted her head, her eyes fixed on the bundle. Caleb could not tell her what he feared. He could only move. He gathered the other puppies into the tarp, tucked the smallest against his chest, and lifted Mara as carefully as his tired arms allowed. She did not resist. Her head turned toward the bundle, nose searching until it found them. Caleb stepped out into the rain with the mother and her 5 puppies held against him, the ruined shed behind him, the forest ahead, and his truck blinking red through the trees like a promise still waiting to be kept. The walk back to the truck felt longer than the path into the woods, though Caleb knew it could not have been more than a few hundred yards. Rain came harder now, slanting through the pines in cold sheets that blurred the flashlight beam and turned every root into a trap. He carried Mara against his left side, her body wrapped in his field jacket, her head low but alert, while the 5 puppies lay bundled in the canvas tarp against his chest. The smallest one, tucked closest to his shirt, gave no sound. Caleb could feel the faintest warmth there, or maybe he only needed to believe he could. "Stay with me," he murmured, not knowing which life he meant. Mara's nose kept pressing toward the bundle, counting, checking, refusing to surrender even as her own strength faded. Twice Caleb had to stop and brace his shoulder against a tree. His lungs burned. Mud pulled at his boots. Somewhere behind him, the broken shed groaned in the storm like an old secret giving way. When the red hazard lights finally appeared through the trees, blinking against the rain, Caleb felt relief hit him so sharply that his knees nearly weakened. He reached the road, opened the rear door of the pickup, and laid the puppies on the blanket he kept behind the seat for emergencies. Mara tried to climb in after them and stumbled. Caleb caught her before she fell. "I have got you," he said, lifting her carefully onto the seat beside the bundle. She curled around the puppies as much as her tired body allowed, nose finding each damp head in turn. The smallest remained tucked in Caleb's shirt until he slid into the driver's seat. Then he placed it inside the fold of his spare sweatshirt and set it close to the heater vent. His hands shook as he turned the heat up all the way. Warm air coughed from the vents, carrying the smell of dust and old coffee. Caleb pulled onto the road, tires cutting through shallow water, and drove toward town with one eye on the windshield and the other flicking to the rearview mirror. In the mirror, Mara's amber eyes reflected the dashboard glow. She did not sleep. She did not look away from the puppies. She lay there like a soldier holding a line no one had ordered her to hold. Caleb grabbed his phone from the console. One bar of service appeared, disappeared, then returned. He called the only clinic he knew that answered after midnight, Harbor Light Veterinary Care, a small white building on the north side of Coos Bay, run by Dr. Emily Carter. The phone rang 5 times. 6. Then a woman's tired voice came through. "Harbor Light Emergency Line. Dr. Carter, this is Caleb Whitaker. I found a German shepherd and 5 puppies out by the old service road near the timber lots. They are cold, soaked, and one of the pups is barely responding." A pause. Sheets of rain hissed under the tires. "How far out are you?" she asked, suddenly awake. 12 minutes if the road holds. Keep them warm. Do not feed them yet. Bring them straight to the side entrance. I will be there. Caleb lowered the phone. 12 minutes. It sounded merciful until he looked at the sweatshirt bundle and saw how still the smallest puppy was. The road curved along the edge of the dark bay, where fishing boats rocked under dock lights and the water flashed silver under the storm. The town was asleep, windows dark, storefront awnings snapping in the wind. Caleb passed the diner where old Marines drank coffee on Sundays, the closed hardware store with flags in the window, the little church with a white cross shining faintly above the wet street. He had driven these blocks 100 times and never felt them so far apart. At a red light, though no cars were coming, he stopped out of habit. Then the smallest puppy made a sound. Not a cry, not even a whimper. A faint click of breath, as if life had knocked once from the other side of a door. Caleb looked down. Come on, little one, he whispered. Just keep knocking. The light changed, and he drove on. Behind him, one of the stronger puppies began to squeak. Mara answered with a low hum from deep in her chest, a sound soft enough to be a lullaby and steady enough to be a command. The other puppies shifted against her. Caleb heard that sound and felt something in him loosen, something that had been clenched since the night he lost Corporal Daniel Reeves under a collapsed wall overseas. Daniel had been 23, red-haired, always smiling, always carrying gum in his pocket for the younger Marines. Caleb had promised him help was coming. He had meant it, meaning it had not been enough. For years, Caleb had measured himself against that final promise and found himself short. But now the road was under him, the clinic ahead, and living souls behind him were still within reach. He pressed the accelerator just a little harder. Harbor Light appeared through the rain at the end of a side street, its porch lamp already on, a pale yellow circle in the storm. Dr. Emily Carter stood beneath the awning in jeans, boots, and a navy raincoat over her scrubs, her light brown hair pulled back, her face calm in the way of people who know panic must never be the loudest thing in a room. She opened the side door before Caleb had fully parked. Bring the mother first, she called. Caleb stepped out into the rain and opened the rear door. Mara lifted her head but did not rise. Her eyes moved from Emily to Caleb and back to the puppies. She will not leave them, Caleb said. Emily's gaze softened. Then we bring them together. They carried the tarp bundle and Mara inside as one family. Warm fluorescent light spilled over the small treatment room. The air smelled of antiseptic, clean towels, and warm blankets. Emily moved quickly, but never roughly, checking Mara's paw, her temperature, her breathing, then the puppies one by one. Caleb stood near the table, soaked to the skin, water pooling at his boots, unable to take his eyes off the smallest pup as Emily placed it on a folded towel beneath a warming lamp. She pressed 2 fingers gently against its side, listened, waited, then looked up at Caleb with the kind of honesty that did not cut, but still hurt. This one is very weak, she said quietly. We are going to do everything we can. Caleb nodded once. Mara, lying on a padded mat beside the table, lifted her head despite the exhaustion in her bones. Her eyes locked on the tiny body under the light. Caleb stepped closer and rested one hand on her damp shoulder. Beneath his palm, her heart was still racing, still fighting, still refusing to believe the night had brought them this far only to stop here. Emily Carter moved with quiet precision, the kind that made the small treatment room feel less like a place of emergency and more like a chapel where every motion mattered. She warmed towels in a metal cabinet, checked temperatures, listened to tiny chests through her stethoscope, and spoke in a low, steady voice that never rose above the sound of the rain against the windows. Caleb stood nearby, still soaked, his dark hair dripping onto the collar of his shirt, his hands raw from the boards he had pulled apart in the shed. He wanted to help, but for the first time that night, there was nothing heavy to lift, no door to break open, no path through the trees to follow. There was only waiting, and waiting had always been the cruelest duty. Mara lay on the padded mat beside the table, wrapped now in a thick gray blanket. Emily had cleaned the scrape on her shoulder and wrapped her front paw with soft white gauze. The shepherd accepted every touch with tired patience, but her eyes never left the smallest puppy beneath the warming lamp. The other 4 had begun to stir. One with a dark stripe down its back pawed weakly at the towel. Another gave a thin but honest cry when Emily rubbed warmth into its sides. The third and fourth moved closer to each other, blind noses searching for their mother's scent. Each small sound should have felt like victory, but the silence of the fifth pup filled the room more than all the others. Caleb watched Emily place a small oxygen tube near its nose. The puppy was no bigger than his hand, its fur still damp at the edges, its chest barely lifting. Emily leaned close, listening. Her face did not change, but Caleb saw the truth pass behind her eyes. She had seen nights like this before. Nights when love arrived just in time for some, and almost in time for others. "He is fighting," she said softly. Caleb nodded, but his throat tightened. Emily glanced at him. "You found him. You can decide." Caleb looked at the tiny body under the lamp, then at Mara, whose ears twitched at every breath. "Scout," he said after a moment. "Little Scout." The name settled into the room like a match struck in darkness. Emily gave the faintest smile. "Then we keep Little Scout warm." Caleb stepped closer to the table. He did not touch the puppy yet. His hands felt too large, too clumsy, too full of old failures. Outside the clinic, a gust of wind rattled the side door. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Mara lifted her head and tried to rise. "Easy," Emily said, placing a gentle hand near her shoulder. But Mara pushed against the blanket, weak but determined, her gaze fixed on the warming table. Caleb crouched beside her. "You brought me to them," he whispered. "You did your part." Mara looked at him, and there was something in that look that made the words feel small. A mother does not have a part. A mother has everything. Caleb swallowed and helped Emily shift the blanket so Mara could see the table more clearly without standing. The shepherd stretched her neck as far as she could and released a soft hum. The same low sound Caleb had heard in the truck, only thinner now, worn down by pain and exhaustion. Little Scout did not move. Emily continued working, rubbing gently with a warm towel, checking his mouth, feeling for the fragile beat beneath his ribs. 1 minute passed, then another. The clock above the sink made each second sound too loud. Caleb stared at its red hands and hated them. He had hated clocks in hospitals, hated countdowns on radios, hated any measure of time that proved mercy could arrive late. His mind slipped again to Corporal Daniel Reeves, to dust in the air and the terrible quiet after shouting stopped. Daniel had asked if the sun was up. Caleb had lied and said yes, though it was midnight. He had wanted Daniel to leave this world imagining light. That lie had lived inside Caleb for years, small and sharp, even though chaplains, counselors, and old Marines had told him he had done what he could. What he could had never felt like enough. Emily looked up. "Caleb," he knew before she finished speaking. Her voice had changed. Not hopeless, but careful. His breathing is almost gone. The room seemed to draw inward. The rain softened. The heater clicked. One of the stronger puppies squeaked from the basket, and Mara answered without taking her eyes from Little Scout. Caleb stepped forward. "Tell me what to do." Emily looked at him for half a breath, weighing something, then placed his hand near the tiny chest. 2 fingers. Gentle pressure. "Slow. Let me guide you." Caleb obeyed. His fingers rested on fur so fine it barely felt real. Emily's hand covered his, showing him the rhythm. Press. Release. Wait. Press. Release. Wait. It was not force. It was invitation. A plea written through touch. Mara's hum deepened, trembling through the room like a prayer no one had taught her. Caleb bent closer, his voice breaking into something lower than a whisper. "Breathe, Little Scout. Do not make her come this far alone." The puppy remained still. Emily listened again. Her eyes lowered. Caleb felt the room tilt toward the old ending he knew too well. The ending where courage and love and speed still failed to reach the one small life that needed them most. He closed his eyes for 1 second, not to give up, but because he could not bear to watch hope leave another body. Then Mara moved. With a strength no one expected, she dragged herself forward across the mat, blanket sliding from her back, and laid her muzzle against the edge of the table beneath Little Scout. She exhaled, long and warm, toward the puppy's face. Caleb opened his eyes. Emily froze. The tiny chest did not rise. Not yet. Caleb kept his fingers in place, following the rhythm. Press. Release. Wait. Mara breathed again, softer this time, her amber eyes shining under the fluorescent light. Caleb whispered the only prayer he had left, without dressing it in church words, without asking for anything grand. Please. For 3 seconds, Nothing answered. Then Little Scout's paw twitched. The twitch was so small Caleb almost doubted he had seen it. A tiny paw, no larger than the end of his thumb, flexed once beneath the warming lamp and fell still again. But Emily Carter had seen it too. Her eyes sharpened, not with surprise, but with the disciplined hope of someone who knew better than to celebrate too early. "Keep going," she said quietly. Caleb did. 2 fingers. Gentle pressure. Slow. Press. Release. Wait. Mara stayed with her muzzle near the table, breathing warm air toward Little Scout, as if lending him the rhythm her body still remembered. The treatment room seemed to hold its breath around them. The storm outside faded into a soft gray roar. The clock ticked. The heater hummed. One of the stronger puppies shifted inside the towel-lined basket, but even that sound felt far away. Caleb's whole world had narrowed to the space beneath his fingers, the almost invisible rise of fragile ribs, the faint heat of the lamp on his wrist, and Mara's amber eyes watching the puppy with a faith too stubborn to explain. Again, Emily whispered. Caleb pressed and released. Little Scout's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then his chest lifted. Just once. A shallow, trembling breath no louder than a thread sliding through cloth. Emily leaned in with the oxygen tube, her voice low and steady. "There you are, Scout. Stay with us." Caleb felt something break open inside him, but not like pain. More like ice cracking under morning sun. He did not move faster. He did not speak louder. He only followed Emily's rhythm, careful not to let relief become carelessness. Press. Release. Wait. The puppy breathed again. Weakly. Then again, after a pause long enough to make Caleb's heart slam against his ribs. Mara gave a sound that was almost a sigh and almost a prayer. Her head sank against the edge of the table, exhaustion finally claiming what fear had been holding upright. Emily glanced toward her. "She needs fluids," she said. "But she will not settle unless she can see him." "Then keep them where they can see each other," Caleb answered, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. Emily nodded once, as if that had been the only right answer. She moved with practiced calm, placing a warm pack beside Little Scout, adjusting the oxygen, then kneeling to check Mara again. The shepherd allowed it, but her gaze never left the tiny pup. Caleb remained by the table, water still dripping from his clothes onto the tile, his fingers hovering near Scout, as if the little body might vanish if he looked away. The other puppies were warming now, their movements slow but stronger. One rooted blindly against the towel. Another gave a squeak that sounded almost offended by the whole night. Emily looked toward the basket and let out a breath that carried the first trace of relief. "For a responding well. The mother is weak, but stable. This one is still critical." Caleb nodded. Critical was not lost. Critical meant there was still a door open somewhere. He could live inside that word. Emily stood and crossed to the counter, where she entered notes into a tablet. "You said you found them near the old timber lots?" "Yes. Behind the service road, maybe half a mile before the bend toward Larkin Creek. That property has been empty for years." Caleb's eyes shifted. He remembered the crate in the shed, the faded stencil caught in the flashlight beam. Coal kennels. The name returned now with the smell of wet wood and the sound of puppies beneath the floor. "Maybe not as empty as people thought," he said. Emily looked up. "What did you see?" "A crate with a name on it. Coal kennels." The effect was slight, but Caleb noticed it. Emily's mouth tightened. She set the tablet down. "Raymond Cole. You know him?" "Most people around here know of him. He used to breed dogs outside town. Claimed he shut down last year after complaints about conditions and permits. I never had proof of anything serious, but I heard enough to remember the name." Caleb looked toward Mara, the pale ring around her neck, the trained way she had blocked the truck, the old discipline in her movements. "She was not born wild," he said. "No," Emily replied, softer now. "She was someone's dog. Maybe someone's worker. Maybe someone's business until she became inconvenient." Caleb's jaw tightened, not with rage, but with something quieter and colder. The kind of resolve that did not need to announce itself. "I want animal control called. I will call them as soon as these 6 are stable enough for me to step away." Caleb looked at Little Scout. 6, he repeated. Emily followed his gaze. The smallest pup breathed again, faint but real. "Yes," she said. 6. The words settled over the room with the warmth of a blanket. Caleb pulled a chair close to the table and sat for the first time since leaving his truck. His legs ached. His hands stung. His shoulders felt carved from stone. But beneath all of that was a strange stillness he had not known in years. Not peace exactly. Peace was too large a word for a knight still balanced on the edge. It was something smaller. A narrow place inside him where the screaming had stopped. Mara blinked slowly from her mat, her body tucked beneath Emily's blanket, her bandaged paw stretched out in front of her. Caleb reached down and rested his hand lightly beside her head, not on her at first, just close enough to offer warmth without asking anything back. After a moment, Mara shifted and placed her chin over his fingers. The trust of it almost undid him. He stared at the shepherd, at the mother who had crossed rain, road, and darkness not to save herself, but to bring a stranger to the lives hidden under broken wood. "You found the right truck," he whispered. Mara's eyes closed halfway, but her ears remained angled toward Little Scout. Emily returned with a small bowl of water and a clean towel. "She needs a name for the chart," she said. Caleb looked at the dog. The name came not from thought, but from the way she had moved through the trees, wounded and unwavering, carrying a mission no one had given her permission to keep. "Mara," he said. Emily wrote it down. Outside, the rain began to soften at last, tapping lightly against the windows instead of striking them. The first pale hint of dawn pressed against the black glass. Inside Harbor Light Veterinary Care, under fluorescent lamps and warm towels, Mara slept with her chin on Caleb's hand, for puppies stirred in a basket. One tiny pup fought breath by breath beneath a lamp, and Caleb Whitaker sat between them all, understanding for the first time in years that being too late once did not mean he was too late forever. By morning, the storm had thinned into a pale coastal drizzle, and Harbor Light Veterinary Care sat quiet beneath a low gray sky that smelled of wet cedar, ocean salt, and clean asphalt. The world outside looked washed and harmless now, as if the night had not tried to take anything at all. Caleb Whitaker had not left the treatment room. Emily had given him dry scrubs from the clinic closet and a cup of coffee that went cold in his hands. He sat in the same chair beside Mara, listening to the soft orchestra of survival around him. For puppies slept in a warmed basket, their bodies tucked into one another like commas in a sentence not yet finished. Little Scout rested beneath the lamp, still fragile, still watched closely, but breathing on his own in shallow, determined pulls. Mara lay on her blanket with her bandaged paw forward and her head near Caleb's boot. Every few minutes, she opened her eyes, checked the room, counted the scents, and closed them again only when she found all 5 puppies where they belonged. Emily moved in and out with charts, towels, and quiet updates. "He made it through the hardest stretch," she said at a little after 7 o'clock, nodding toward Little Scout. "That does not mean we stop watching, but it means he wanted to stay." Caleb looked at the tiny pup, at the way his ribs lifted under the amber glow. "He had help," he said. Emily glanced at Mara. "So did you." Caleb did not answer. He looked down at the shepherd's head resting near him and knew Emily was right in a way that made his chest ache. Around 8, a white county animal control truck pulled into the lot, followed by a sheriff's cruiser with rain beads shining on the hood. Emily met them at the side entrance while Caleb stayed with Mara. He heard low voices in the hallway. Names. Directions. The old timber lots. Coal kennels. Then the door opened and Deputy Aaron Mills stepped in, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with tired blue eyes, a trimmed sandy beard, and the careful posture of someone who had delivered bad news often enough to hate it. Behind him came Officer Grace Holloway from County Animal Services, a white woman in her 50s with silver blonde hair tucked beneath a cap and kindness lines around her mouth that did not make her look soft, only seasoned. "Staff Sergeant Whitaker?" the deputy asked. Caleb stood. "Yes." Mills looked at the puppies, then at Mara, and his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "Dr. Carter told us what you found." Caleb nodded toward the treatment table. "There may be more out there than what I brought in." Officer Holloway stepped closer to Mara, stopping several feet away and lowering herself slightly so the dog could see she meant no threat. Mara opened her eyes. Her ears lifted, but she did not growl. "She is trained," Holloway said quietly, "and tired past telling." Caleb's voice remained low. There was a faded crate in the shed. It said coal kennels. Mills exchanged a look with Holloway. "We are going to check the property now. There were prior complaints, but nothing anyone could prove by the time officers arrived." Emily's face tightened from where she stood near the counter. People heard things. They saw things. But the place always looked cleaned up when inspected. Caleb looked down at Mara's pale collar mark. Someone removed her tag. Maybe, Holloway said. Or maybe she slipped out before they finished hiding her. The word hiding moved through the room like a draft. Caleb felt Mara shift against his leg, as if she understood more from tone than language. He reached down and let his fingers rest lightly between her ears. She was not hiding, he said. She was looking. No one spoke for a moment. Little Scout took another small breath under the lamp. Holloway's eyes softened. Then we follow where she was looking. The deputy asked Caleb to describe the path, the shed, the drainage pit, and anything else he remembered. Caleb gave every detail with marine clarity. The bend before Larkin Creek, the fallen cedar near the clearing, the rusted rain barrel, the collapsed back corner, the crate against the wall. His voice stayed, even until Mills asked about the puppies. Then Caleb paused. He looked at the basket. For small bodies twitched in sleep. He looked at Scout, still smaller than the rest, still fighting for each breath. They were underneath the floor, he said. Cold. Quiet. Almost out of time. Mills wrote it down, but his jaw tightened. Holloway did not write for a second. She only looked at Mara. And she brought you there. Yes. The room grew still again. Not empty. Reverent. Outside, tires rolled through wet gravel as the sheriff's cruiser and animal control truck pulled away toward the timber lots. Caleb watched through the window until they disappeared into the gray morning. He wanted to go with them. Some part of him needed to stand in that clearing in daylight to make sure the night had not left anything behind. But Mara lifted her head then, searching the room, and Caleb understood his post had not changed. He was still on watch. Emily came to stand beside him. They will call when they know more. Caleb nodded, then sat again. Mara lowered her head onto his boot, and this time she slept deeply, without checking the door. The trust settled over him heavier than any medal he had ever worn. He had spent years believing he had failed the one voice he could not save. Yet here, in a small clinic on the Oregon coast, a wounded mother had chosen him in the rain, and 5 tiny lives had followed him back into the light. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on Little Scout's breathing. For the first time in years, he did not ask why he had been the one left standing. He simply stayed where he was needed. The call came at 10:42 in the morning, just as a pale strip of sunlight broke through the clouds above Coos Bay and laid itself across the clinic floor. Caleb Whitaker saw Emily Carter look at her phone, saw the change in her eyes before she answered, and felt the room become still around him. Mara was awake again, her head raised from the blanket, her ears turning toward the quiet vibration of the phone as if she understood that the world beyond the clinic door had not finished speaking. Emily stepped into the hallway, but her voice carried back in low fragments. Yes, the old shed. More crates. Records. No animals left behind. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second, not out of relief, but because the body sometimes needs a quiet place to put mercy when it finally arrives. When Emily returned, she did not rush her words. They found documentation at the property, she said. Old kennel records, unpaid citations, supply receipts, enough for the county to move forward. Officer Holloway said there were signs that Mara and the puppies had been kept there recently, but they did not find any other dogs on the property. Caleb looked toward Mara. So she got them all out. Emily's gaze softened. She got help for all the ones who were still there. Mara lowered her head, as if the sentence had finally allowed her to rest. Little Scout slept beneath the warming lamp, his breathing still shallow but steadier now, each rise of his tiny ribs a quiet refusal to disappear. The 4 other puppies had taken small feedings from Emily's careful hand, stumbling through hunger and warmth with blind determination. The one with the dark stripe had already tried to crawl over its siblings twice, earning from Emily the affectionate warning that trouble often came wrapped in the smallest bodies. Caleb watched them and felt a tired smile pull at the edge of his mouth. It surprised him. The feeling was so unfamiliar that he almost mistrusted it. By noon, Deputy Mills and Officer Holloway returned to the clinic with damp boots and faces marked by a morning spent in difficult places. They did not bring spectacle with them. No loud declarations. No dramatic anger. Only facts, gathered carefully, carried respectfully. Raymond Cole had been located at a small rental office outside North Bend, and taken in for questioning about the unlicensed kennel operation, neglect complaints, and abandoned property records. The county would handle the case from there. The courts would take time. Paperwork would take longer. But Mara and the puppies were safe, and for Caleb, that was the first true verdict of the day. Officer Holloway stood near the treatment room door, looking at the family on the blankets. There will be a holding period, she explained gently. Legal steps, medical reports, ownership review. But given the condition she was found in and what was found at the site, I do not expect anyone to have a rightful claim that outweighs her welfare. Caleb nodded. He understood procedure. He had lived most of his adult life inside rules, orders, and chain of command. But then Mara shifted her weight and pressed her bandaged paw against his boot. Holloway noticed. A small smile touched her face. And I can see she has an opinion. Emily folded her arms, tired but pleased. She has had opinions since 2 a.m. Deputy Mills looked at Caleb. You did the right thing calling it in. Caleb shook his head slightly. She did the right thing. I just followed. Mills studied him for a moment, then nodded as if that answer made more sense than most. After they left, the clinic became quiet again. Afternoon light warmed the windows. The rainwater on the parking lot began to dry in broken silver patches. Emily changed Mara's bandage, checked Little Scout's temperature, and finally told Caleb that he could go home for a shower and real sleep. Caleb looked at the mother dog, then at the puppies. He knew he should leave. His body was heavy, his eyes burned, and the night was still clinging to him like smoke. But when he stood, Mara lifted her head too quickly, worry returning to her face. The movement pulled at something deep in him. He crouched beside her. I am not leaving, he said softly. Not the way you are afraid of. Mara studied him, searching for the truth beneath the words. Caleb had seen that kind of search before in men who needed promises to be stronger than fear. He reached into the pocket of the dry scrubs Emily had given him and pulled out his old dog tags. They were scratched, dulled, and warm from being carried close for years. He let them hang from his fingers where Mara could smell them. These belonged to a version of me who thought he had nothing left to protect, he whispered. I was wrong. Mara sniffed the tags, then leaned forward and touched her nose to his knuckles. It was not forgiveness. She had no reason to forgive him. It was acceptance, which in that moment felt even holier. Emily watched from the counter, pretending to organize gauze so he could have the dignity of privacy. Little Scout stirred under the lamp and made a sound almost too soft to name. Mara's ears lifted. Caleb rose and stepped to the table. The tiny pup stretched one paw into the warm air, then settled again, breathing with effort, but breathing. Caleb looked through the window at the clearing sky beyond the clinic lot. For years, he had believed miracles arrived like thunder, loud enough to silence doubt. But this one had come as a wounded dog in the rain, a cry beneath rotten floorboards, a paw twitching under a lamp, and a mother who would not stop believing her babies were worth finding. By late afternoon, Caleb finally sat on the floor between Mara's blanket and the warming table, his back against the wall, one hand resting where Mara could reach it. He did not sleep, not fully. He drifted in and out while the clinic breathed around him. For once, when he closed his eyes, he did not hear the voice he had lost. He heard 5 small breaths, uneven and alive, and the steady breathing of a German shepherd who had run through darkness and found him before he disappeared into his own. 3 weeks later, the first thing Caleb Whitaker noticed was the quiet. Not the empty kind that used to wait for him in his small house outside Coos Bay, where the refrigerator hummed too loudly and the walls seemed to hold their breath after sunset. This quiet was different. It was full. It carried the soft scratch of tiny paws against a blanket, the sleepy sigh of a mother dog stretched in a patch of morning sun, and the small, stubborn breathing of a puppy who had once been almost lost beneath a broken shed floor. The county had completed its review, and no rightful claim had been made for Mara or her puppies. Raymond Cole's case moved into the hands of people whose work lived in documents, hearings, and careful proof. Caleb did not need to hear every detail. He only needed to know that Mara would never be returned to a place that had taught her fear, and that her puppies would begin life under hands that knew gentleness. Harbor Light Veterinary Care had become a kind of second home during those weeks. Emily Carter had watched Little Scout gain ounce after ounce, had laughed when the puppy with the dark stripe learned to climb out of the basket before his eyes were fully open, and had pretended not to cry when Mara stood on all four paws again without trembling. Caleb came every day before work and every evening after, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in jeans and a flannel shirt, always with coffee for Emily and a quiet word for Mara. At first, Mara had watched the door each time he entered, as if afraid one day he would not. Then, little by little, her tail began to move before he spoke. By the end of the third week, she knew the sound of his truck in the gravel lot and lifted her head before the bell above the clinic door even rang. The four stronger puppies were placed with families Emily trusted deeply. One with a retired Navy corpsman and his wife in Florence, one with a young firefighter in North Bend, one with a Marine widow who lived near the dunes, and one with Deputy Mills, who insisted he was only fostering until the puppy fell asleep inside his jacket and ended the discussion without words. Caleb signed the adoption papers for Mara and Little Scout on a Friday afternoon beneath a sky rinsed clean by rain. Emily slid the clipboard across the counter, and for a moment Caleb simply looked at the lines where his name belonged. He had signed orders, statements, medical forms, condolence letters, and documents that closed chapters he never wanted closed. This signature felt different. It did not end anything. It opened a door. He wrote Caleb Daniel Whitaker carefully, his middle name sitting there like a bridge to the friend he had lost. Emily noticed, but said nothing. She only placed a small blue collar on the counter, sized for Scout, with a blank silver tag attached. Caleb picked it up and turned it between his fingers. "I have something for that," he said. That evening, he brought Mara and Little Scout home. His house sat on a quiet acre at the edge of the trees, with a gravel drive, a cedar porch, and a view of the bay when the fog allowed it. For years it had looked maintained but unlived in, every tool in its place, every room too neat, every chair pushed in as if no one had ever truly rested there. Mara stepped through the front door slowly, nose low, reading the house in layers of scent. Pine floorboards, old leather, coffee, rain jackets, something lonely, fading now. Little Scout wobbled behind her on soft paws, fearless in the way only the very small can be, his round belly swaying as he crossed the entry rug. Caleb watched them from the doorway, holding his breath without meaning to. Mara entered the living room, circled once, and laid down beside the fireplace as if she had chosen a post. Scout climbed clumsily over one of her front legs, failed, tried again, and finally collapsed against her chest with a sigh too large for his body. Caleb laughed. The sound startled him less than it had before. Outside, the sun lowered behind the pines, laying gold across the windows. Caleb went to the small wooden box on the mantel where he kept his old dog tags. He had carried them through deserts, hospitals, funerals, and years of sleepless nights. Now he took one tag from the chain and held it in his palm. The metal was scratched and dulled, but the name remained clear. Whitaker. Below it, a number. Below that, the quiet proof that he had belonged to something larger than himself. He did not put the tag on Scout as a claim. He fastened it beside the puppy's silver collar tag as a promise. Little Scout blinked up at him, then bit the edge of Caleb's sleeve with the seriousness of a dog accepting duty. Mara watched, amber eyes calm. Caleb sat on the floor beside them, his back against the couch, the fire unlit because the room was warm enough without it. He thought of the night on the service road, the rain, the cry beneath the floor, the paw twitching under the lamp. He thought of Daniel asking if the sun was up. For the first time, the memory did not arrive like punishment. It came softly, with grief still inside it, but also with light. "It is up now," Caleb whispered. Mara placed her chin on his knee. Scout curled into the space between them, breathing deep and steady, the old tag resting against his tiny chest. Outside, the trees moved in the evening wind, and somewhere far off, a church bell rang 6 times over the bay. Caleb closed his eyes and listened. No thunder, no alarms, no voices trapped in the dark. Only a mother dog resting, a puppy living, and the quiet mercy of being found when he had not known he was lost.